Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
Good
salam.
afternoon. Happy to have you around. Can you just, in your own words, introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Faten Aggad. I'm a climate diplomacy advisor at the African Climate Foundation, which is a philanthropy grant-making foundation, the only one and the first one in Africa, headquartered in Cape Town, but also operating from Nairobi and Dakar.
Can you break it down to us? What is climate diplomacy exactly?
Very good question. So climate diplomacy essentially focuses on facilitating the engagement, particularly at diplomatic level. So we know, we are sitting at the COP at the moment where a lot of negotiations are taking place. But climate diplomacy also looks at how do African countries and how do we support engagements of African countries through all the diplomatic channels, be it bilateral cooperation, be it negotiations in other fora, such as the World Trade Organization, for instance, because some of the climate-related issues are also landing on the agenda of the WTO. It's at the level of the United Nations. So climate diplomacy is really about connecting these different pieces of discussion on climate-related matters with relevance to the continent.
And what are your priorities?
So the priorities are, I would say we have three key priorities as a foundation, and if I bring it also to the question of negotiations. One is to ensure that there is a recognition that African countries have their own special circumstances, the recognition that as countries, each one may have its own transition path. The second one is that such transition path needs to have development at its heart. This is not a transition it does an environmental component, but not alone. Whether you're doing it in a just manner, are you delivering on socioeconomic needs of your population to make sure that whatever we negotiate does not take us backwards in terms of development, and everything that links to that. It's how do you design your agricultural intervention, your energy transition, etc. And the third one I would say is really in terms of making sure that African countries have the enabling tools that would allow them to transition in that just manner. And those enabling tools are in the form of finance, a reliable, predictable, just finance. It's in the form of a new design for international regulations, etc.
In doing so, what do you find more challenging?
What we find most challenging is for people to see Africa as an opportunity. When we speak today we speak a lot of energy transition. Africa has, compared to other regions, the highest capacity in terms of renewable energy, be it wind, be it solar, exactly. And yet what we notice is that when people think of Africa, they don't look necessarily at those opportunities.
And as solutions.
And the solution, you speak, for instance, to investors on, on the potential, on how can you attract investment, and they say, well, Africa is risky. Is it really risky? And you try to push in terms of defining that risk, and it's old-fashioned approach, old-fashioned prejudice, I would say, on Africa, and so we need to change that notion.
And how do you, how do you make it happen? How do you convince them?
By putting facts on the table. I think what we perhaps have not done well on the continent is supporting the narrative with more data. For instance, facts, putting those facts on the table. For instance, in the whole debate around finance, there's somehow this perception that African countries also need to take a responsibility in terms of finance. But the truth of the matter is that our countries are already putting money on the table on a daily basis to respond to the challenge of climate change. And so we need to somehow find a way to elevate that data, give it much more visibility. And the same would apply in terms of investments. Investors need to see the market potential for Africa, that this is not just an extractive relationship, that there are Africans, there's a rising middle class, there's a demand for energy access across the continent, and therefore we are able, I think, with the right investments, to tap into the potential while securing a development pathway for the continent.
Thank you very much. Shukran.
Thank you very much for having me.